You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Ethan Haristodoulou.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron, and a happy Memorial Day to you all, and a big thank you to those who have served. I am Ethan Haristodoulou, and today, as we do every Monday, we are diving into our power rankings, this time following Week 7 of the USFL. Another weekend with a couple of wild results and some really good action, to be honest. From top to bottom, these games were all decided by very close margins, and we're kind of in a deadlock now with every single team, and I'll pull this up on the screen for you guys here. I was looking at the standings, and this is a wild thing to see. Every single team right now currently in the USFL is sitting at 2-2 within their division. I've been feeling now for the last couple of weeks that it's just been very hard making selections and trying to come out positive through my week-over-week picks, and I'm currently sitting at 16-12, so we're above 500, but I've had a handful of weekends now where I keep splitting 2-2, where there's a couple of games I feel confident about, a couple that I don't, and then typically I end up splitting with the games I'm confident about and a split with the games that I'm not confident about. It has been a very wild year for the USFL. The South is completely gridlocked right now with the Stallions at 5-2 and everyone else at 4-3, and the North remains open, but the Stars feel like they might be pulling away with that number 1 spot. But without further ado, let's dive in. Let's start getting into some of these power rankings here and really getting through the nitty-gritty, breaking these teams down and see where we have them all ranked. Make sure you comment down below. I'd love to hear your rankings as well as I'm diving through mine. But beginning with the two bottom teams at number 8 and at number 7, coming off of a loss at that number 8 spot, we have the New Jersey Generals, and then right in front of them at number 7, we have the Michigan Panthers. So the Generals now dropping all the way to the bottom of the league. They are the bottom of the barrel at this point. I'm going to start this off by saying that the offense of the Generals is better with DeAndre Johnson under center, and that is without question here. I know there was a moment a few weeks ago where they pulled DeAndre Johnson and they kept him out of the game. He got the stuff in his eye while he was playing. Kyle Lauletta came in. The passing attack looked a little bit better, but I think that was really just more so the unexpected turn of having Kyle Lauletta in the game that really benefited them, because since then, I know he had a couple of touchdown passes this past week, but I just feel like this offense, with the uncertainty that they bring against a defense where you have a quarterback like DeAndre Johnson who has a great arm and can hit you for deep passes. We saw that in the touchdown pass he had to Alonzo Moore, but also with his legs, just the escapability that he brings. Defenses have to account for that more. It opens things up for Darius Victor as well as a running back. I prefer this offense with DeAndre Johnson under center, and I really hope that we get to see that going into next week's game. But as I mentioned, I mean, despite the couple of touchdowns Lauletta threw, you had the touchdown ultimately from DeAndre Johnson as well. Before those two, it just really came down to it's like just peaks and valleys. Peaks and valleys is the way I look at this offense. The defense continues to be great, minus the one giant Walker touchdown for 68 yards. I mean, they were solid. They had 7 pass breakups, 5 tackles for loss. They continue to, at times, struggle to get to the quarterback. They only had 1 sack on the night. But, I mean, overall, the defense was really good. They were in it till the very end. And I just feel like if we had DeAndre Johnson in the entirety of that game, we might be seeing a different result, and maybe the Panthers are sitting at the number 8 spot and the Generals are sitting at number 7, but ultimately that's not the way things went. Panthers came away with the win 25-22, and hence why I have them at the number 7 spot. Josh Love finally hitting a stride after what feels like weeks of just incompetence on the offensive side of the ball for the Panthers, and in that second half, he really lit it up, but ultimately finishing the afternoon 16 of 29. He had 264 yards through the air and 3 touchdowns, a hat trick for him. Reggie Corbin, Joe Walker, Trey Quinn, all contributing massively. Again, I mentioned the Joe Walker touchdown, that huge 68-yard touchdown to put them in a position to really win that game as things were kind of getting out of hand in the fourth quarter. Defense looked great basically the entirety of the game as well. Again, this is a defense that I think handles pocket passers a lot better than they do quarterbacks that are more apt to scramble, and them not playing DeAndre Johnson, I think ultimately benefited the Panthers. And if they have DeAndre Johnson in there, I see this defense struggling more. But despite a slow start, this was probably the most complete game that we have seen from the Michigan Panthers since I guess week one, honestly. I mean, they have just not looked good on offense for the last the last month now at this point. It's hard to believe we're this far into the season, but yeah, for the last month, offensively, they have not looked great. The defense has struggled, but this was a very complete game by them, and the most complete I feel we've seen in some time. I don't know if this is a possibility for, maybe a sneak into the playoffs by the Panthers. You're going to have to ultimately overcome the Generals, and you have to deal with, the possibility that the Maulers maybe make something happen despite their offensive woes. But, I mean, things are tight in the North. You basically have to continue to win out, though. You have to control your own destiny, and the Panthers do somewhat, but you have to keep winning. You have to keep winning if you're the Panthers and if you want to sneak your way into the playoffs for the North Division. But ultimately, I like the Panthers at 7. Generals sit at the bottom for me. 2 North teams to start off the list. Coming in at numbers 6 and numbers 5, the Maulers coming in at that 6th spot, and then I have the Breakers at number 5 here. The Maulers and Breakers actually stay pat. They are where they were last week in my power rankings. I'm happy with keeping them where they are just because of everything else that I've seen in the league and their performances this past week as well. So the Maulers early had the Stars reeling. I feel like they were capitalizing on all the mistakes. Defensively, they were doing good. Special teams, I would argue at this point right now that the Maulers might have the best special teams unit in the USFL. The only other argument I really have for them is like the Stallions, but right now the Maulers special teams, between blocking field goals or just taking advantage of missed snaps and things like that. You also had the 88-yard kick return touchdown by Joshua Simmons. Isaiah Henney also had himself a punt return that at first we thought was a touchdown, but ultimately he got stopped at like the 1 or 2 yard line. But I mean, massive returns from the special teams there. The biggest issue really at this point for the Maulers right now is just the offensive line continuing to struggle to protect and open up running lanes for them to have a true rushing attack. Yes, Troy Williams can throw the ball when he has some time, and he makes time for himself as well. But if you cannot get a legitimate running game going, I just don't see a way for the Maulers to find themselves in the playoffs when it is all said and done in the regular season. And it's disappointing. You have such a great defense over there in Pittsburgh. They are arguably the best unit in the USFL still at this point, despite this is probably the worst game that they had. And I don't even know if I really blame the defense too much. It's just, the offense really not helping you out. But ultimately, you have a great defense. You have a quarterback who, if he just had more time and a running game to back him up, I think would really flourish. But I mean, everything kind of feels like it's on Troy Williams' shoulder right now. If you could just get a solid running game going, I really feel like the Maulers could at least compete for that number 2 spot. It feels like the Stars might be starting to pull away with the number 1 seed for the North Division, but that number 2 spot is still open despite the Maulers being where they are record-wise. They need some things to kind of fall their way. Nobody's eliminated from playoff contention yet, but if they could just get a decent running game going, I feel like the offense would balance itself out a little bit more. They could become more threatening, and they could work with a special teams unit and a defensive unit that have been playing very, very well and keeping them in games. It's just, it feels like the offense cannot follow up and finish those games. And then jumping into the Breakers at number 5 with their 24-20 loss to the Stallions, the offensive woes just continue to pile on for this team, and it's tough for me as a Breakers fan to watch it, but seeing the way the game played out this week, it honestly came out a little bit better than I was kind of anticipating. I'll give them credit for moving the ball a little bit better than they have in the last few weeks. They were definitely doing a great job of spreading the ball around. It felt like the offense became a little more one-dimensional with so much reliance on Wes Hills and Sage Surratt. But I mean, you got the 6 receptions from Johnny Dixon, the 6 from Jonathan Adams, Sage Surratt continuing to get his catches as well. And I mean, Wes Hills even had a decent game as well. It was about 70 some odd yards or so decent game on the ground for him as well. It felt like the offense was more balanced, but you were failing to finish drives. You had to settle for 4 field goals. And while they were 50% on third down, the 50% that they were not successful on were like those key third downs that ultimately led to them having to settle for the field goals and not get themselves into the end zone instead. Defensively, they're still a disruptive unit. They do an excellent job. They had 3 sacks on the day, 3 tackles for loss. They had a fumble recovery as well. If the offense could just clean itself up and play a solid 4 quarters of football, get into the end zone like they were the first few weeks of the season, this is a team that should, at the very least, find themselves as the number 2 team in the playoffs. They have so much talent. It's just this slump that the offense has fallen in the last 3 weeks. They're in complete disarray, it feels like, and I don't know what it is, but they just can't finish drives off. They can't get into the end zone. This was a step in the right direction this week in their loss to the Stallions, but until they find a way to finish drives and execute and convert on those key third downs that matter, it doesn't matter if you're going 50% or even maybe higher than that on third down. If you're not executing and converting on the third downs that matter most, that decide between touchdowns or field goals, I don't really care what you're doing on third down and how well it looks in terms of the numbers and in relation to the rest of the league. You got to make those key plays and get things done where they need to get done, not just, have stats that look nice. Because it wasn't a terrible day statistically for the team all around. It was just it's an L at the end of the day. And the numbers that really mattered, those third downs and deciding on either field goals or touchdowns, ultimately puts you in the loss column again for the third straight week now. Looking at the next 2 teams, we're circling the Stars at number 4 and the Gamblers at number 3. So the Philadelphia Stars sitting at the number 4 spot right now, the team that is number 1 in the North Division at the moment. Big victory over the Maulers, but it was not necessarily the most clean victory, I would say, over the Maulers. But this was definitely the best game that this team has had offensively, I would say, this season. There were some miscues here and there, but ultimately, Case Cookus was 18 of 30. He had 235 yards, couple of touchdowns. He had the pick. Not a big deal, though. It didn't cost them the game or anything like that. Matt Colburn, to see him getting more and more involved these last couple of weeks has been an absolute godsend for this team. This is exactly what I wanted to see from him a couple of weeks ago when I was pounding the table to get him more involved, and to see him come out with 82 yards on the ground, couple of rushing touchdowns. He even had a couple of catches for 13 yards to the air as well out of the backfield. Then Devin Gray and Corey Coleman both snagging massive 56-yard grabs, Coleman's being for a touchdown. This is what the offense needs to be, a well-balanced, oiled machine where it's not too reliant on Case Cookus. You have a guy like Matt Colburn in the backfield who you should be trying to get involved in your offense in every way possible. He is a very skilled running back. And then again, Case Cookus doesn't have all the pressure on his shoulders. Your running game is keeping the defense a little bit more honest. They have to respect what Colburn is doing during the duration of the game. And then boom, you're popping Devin Gray and Corey Coleman for those massive receptions. Coleman again for that huge touchdown, one-play drive to get yourself in the end zone. This was the best game that I have seen from the Stars probably this entire year. You could argue maybe week 1, but even week 1 there was a few things that you could really pick out and you go, this was a complete and well-balanced attack on the offensive side of the ball. And the defense looked great themselves. 5 sacks, 7 tackles for loss. They had a fumble recovery as well, an interception. And on top of that, they held the Maulers to just 3 for 11 on third downs. This was a very complete game offensively, and to be fair, a complete game in totality for this team. The only real thing that, was just like a slight turnover here, you could say the misfire with the field goal attempt that they had where the snap went over the snap went overhead and, it flew back. The Maulers recovered ultimately, but overall, this was a really strong game by the Stars and a step in the right direction to securing the number 1 spot in the North Division. As for the Gamblers, this game really comes down to just a couple of really big mistakes from Kenji Bahar with the interceptions, one obviously being late, which was the game-sealing pick, and on top of that, a blocked field goal. The Gamblers had a shot in this game. Mark Thompson was having probably the hardest day he's had so far this season since debuting for the Gamblers as the running back this season. But when you go up against the Showboats defense and just how good they have become the last few weeks, it's not really a surprise that you had the game that you had. We'll get into the numbers of the Showboats, but just defensively, Kenji Bahar seemed like he was off. The pressure was clearly getting to him. He was missing throws. He had a couple of really big passes to Justin Hall that were like key crucial plays that needed to be made that were just slightly off the fingertips, a little too high or off to the side, whatever it may have been. And it just felt like something was a little bit off. They just weren't quite clicking offensively. The defense still looks really good. They ultimately held the Showboats to the 20 points that they had. If this team plays clean, I still think they're one of the most complete teams and arguably the most complete team in the USFL right now. It was just this Showboats defense came to play and gave them an absolute headache to deal with through the entirety of this game. Now, moving into numbers 2 and number 1 to wrap up the list here. Sitting at number 2, the Memphis Showboats at 4-3 now. An improbable 4-3 when you look back at this team a month ago, and then the Stallions reclaiming the throne at number 1. Now, I'll say this. I am a little unsure of numbers 2 through 4 on my list. I think there's strong arguments to have these teams organized a little bit differently, but with how good this defense has become in Memphis, there is no doubt in my mind that they could find themselves as one of the 2 teams within the South Division's playoffs. This defense has been an unbelievable turnaround the last few weeks and is a massive reason, and arguably the largest reason, why they're on a 4-game winning streak right now against the Gamblers, who have been able to dump points after points after points on teams. Yes, they've kind of come into a little bit of a struggle recently, but I mean, Mark Thompson is typically hammering away. Kenji Bahar is typically doing an excellent job, or at the very least a solid job, just keeping the football safe and not making mistakes. You're looking at 4 sacks. They had 7 tackles for loss. They had a couple of interceptions, and then 12 total pass breakups. This secondary and even some of the linebackers were just all over the Gamblers' wide receivers. They are playing with an intensity right now, and they are on a mission like I feel I'm not seeing from anyone else on defense in the rest of the league. And the Showboats have gone from being a team that was a laughingstock at 0-3 to arguably the best defensive team in the USFL right now. Them and the Maulers have that conversation at this point. It really did feel like a few weeks ago that, the Maulers were the definitive best defense in the USFL. But I think with the way the Showboats have played this last month, at this point, coming off of this game, the way they are right now, sitting at 4-3 and in a dogfight for the South, this is a team that deserves to be in that conversation for best defense. It has been incredible the way they have played to bring themselves back to where they are. And yes, defense has been great. The offense has not necessarily been stellar. They've just done a good enough job to get some points on the board where needed to be and let the defense do a lot of the heavy lifting, because Cole Kelly continues to kind of be like 50-50. However, there's an emerging running game now. We got back-to-back weeks of solid carrying altogether. 31 carries totaled, 126 yards. You're averaging 4.1 yards per carry. Derek Dillon, I would say, kind of bailed out the team big time late in the game with his 64-yard touchdown. This is a team that is anchored by the defense, and as long as the offense can do just enough, they have a legitimate shot. And I do think there is a big chance that we see them in the playoffs. It's really going to take a meltdown by the offense, but this defensive turnaround that we're seeing with the Memphis Showboats is not something you see too often, and I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am, because they put on an absolute clinic this week. And there was a point where we were like in the second quarter where I just felt like there was no way the Gamblers were going to win this game. And it got close at the end, but you could tell early that this Memphis defense, they had it figured out. They had it figured out, and they figured it out fairly early on. And then to wrap things up, the list at number 1, Birmingham Stallions reclaiming the throne, 5-2, best record in the USFL right now. Big 24-20 win and a revenge victory at that against the New Orleans Breakers, who were playing host for this game and had the Stallions fans sitting on the away side, funny enough, despite it being in Birmingham. Magoo continues his MVP campaign, and at this point, I feel like he is the USFL MVP, barring any massive meltdown or setback from Magoo's part. He went 16-23, nearly 70% completion. He had 176 yards to the air, touchdown. He had 22 yards off 7 carries. He had a rushing touchdown as well. Running game, this is exactly what I think this team needs to ultimately get over the hump and win the championship for back-to-back seasons. Their running game has not necessarily been great, but CJ Marable, awesome effort by him. 138 yards total on the day, no touchdowns, but he did a great job in both the running game and out of the backfield receiving. He came on a mission with Alex Magoo to come out victorious in this game up against their rivals. The defense won the third downs that mattered the most. I talked about it with the Breakers earlier, just having to settle for field goals over and over and over again. Yeah, the Breakers converted 50% of the time, but it was not the 50% that they needed to be converting when it mattered the most. And this Stallions defense altogether, they continue to bend, but they don't break. They're an excellent unit, and this is the most battle-tested unit, I would say, throughout the entire USFL, because they have dealt with a litany of injuries. They're missing a handful of guys still at this point in the season, but they're still finding ways to win. Players are stepping up and contributing, and I have a hard time trying to figure out who else you could have at the number one spot right now in the USFL if it is not the Birmingham Stallions. So please, in the comment section, let me know who you think it should be, because I have a hard time picking anyone besides the Stallions, and I am somebody that roots for the Breakers. But that is it for me. If you made it to the end of the video, I appreciate you for watching. Again, make sure you comment down below your power rankings. Would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on mine and your own. But I will catch you all in the next video. See you all next time. Have a good one.